1970, Cologne. I spent my childhood in attics and cellars. Now I sit above a courtroom. The law that once hunted us now wears my face. He writes it in blue ink on the back of a docket card. A date, a place, a sentence that cannot yet be spoken from the bench. He signs it with the name on the brass plate outside his office, Dr. Karl Hirsch, Landgericht Köln. He signs it with the name his mother whispered while the boots moved on the stairs, Kalman. He is both. He sits above a courtroom where defendants and witnesses American officers once weighed now stand beneath fluorescent tubes and a black eagle. Cologne, May 1945. The British arrive from the west. Their tanks nose through streets that were once lines on a streetcar map and are now lines on a map of debris. The cathedral stands like a charred tooth. Everything else is stone. The occupation reports call it severe structural damage to urban fabric. The Bundesarchiv preserves a photograph of two women standing on a pile of brick, skirts knotted, hands raw, faces blank with work. The caption will later use the word history chose for them, Trümmerfrauen. Women of rubble. He is 8. If we take the arithmetic of years, he is both younger and older than the shells of his blocks. The attic where the butcher's widow hid him smells of soot and ham. He marks days by the rhythm of her feet on the stairs. When the air raid siren was the law, the cellar belonged to mobilized silence. There is a mathematics to survival in a city without doors, a cup, a wall, a breath held on the other side of a knock. The occupation files that will later include his name, underlined and corrected 3 times, list him as stateless Jew, minor, unaccompanied, the letters tight on the page, the ink smudged where someone's hand hesitated. A British sergeant notes in his report that the civilians remain quiet but fearful of retribution. There is a curfew. 6 in the evening feels like a sentence. Looting brings a court-martial, sometimes worse. The CCGBE Weekly Intelligence Summary marks the mood, defeat, relief, hunger. He enters a line. He receives a ration card. The card is mathematics of life, printed with numbers that cannot lie. Bread, 300 grams. Fat, 30. Meat, 50 if available. Sugar, 20. The winter to come will be called the hunger winter. The bones in the street will not be animal bones. The Allied intelligence summaries will talk about caloric deficits. He will remember the taste of kohlruben, the turnips that stain the breath and the year. Cigarettes become a currency because paper with numbers is a joke when trays stand empty. Lucky strikes are coins. Pall Malls mean meat. The black market is the only market. In the shadow of the cathedral, men trade for shoes. A British captain confiscates a sack of coffee. He writes in a weekly report that the native population displays a proclivity for barter. The mathematics of value is simple. Anything that can be eaten is valuable. Anything that can be burned is valuable. Anything that can be hidden in a pocket is valuable. The arithmetic of guilt is more complicated. He lies in a military infirmary with his legs in blankets that smell like disinfectant and cold. A nurse from Manchester brings him a biscuit wrapped in a handkerchief. He hides it under his pillow because habits are the longest-lived species after war. In Bergen-Belsen, the DP camp built on a graveyard, a social worker in a UNRA jacket writes that the children show a high degree of resourcefulness and suspicion. The files will call them Shirit Hapeltar, the saved remnant. The arithmetic of their lives is subtraction. Parents absent, papers absent, language shaky, but they draw maps. They locate themselves in a new geometry of aid organizations and missionary sisters and lists. In the British zone, denazification is a directive and a practice. Control Council Directive Number 38 writes the categories in careful English and German, Hauptschuldig. Belastet, Miederbelastet, Mitlaffer, Entlastet. The words taste like bread left too long in the mouth. Major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. The categories look like clarity. They will hold water for a time and then leak. The famous number is 131. The math of the past is forced into checkboxes. Were you a member of the NSDAP? Did you attend rallies? Did you hold office? There are letters from neighbors that function like baptismal certificates in a new religion. He was no Nazi, he helped Jews. Persilschein, they call them, after the laundry detergent that makes grey white. The Bundesarchiv keeps stacks of them tied with twine. He moves to Cologne because someone he calls Tante Hannah tells him they remember. The new Jewish community has a borrowed room and a ledger. They give him shoes. They give him German words that he already has, but does not yet trust. He learns to write them on clean paper. He steals chalk from a classroom because owning chalk feels like owning time. He is adopted then, not adopted, then attached to a family that lost a son in Stalingrad and a father in 1916. They call him Karl because Kalman tastes like hunger to them. He answers to both because he has learned to survive in two languages. The city's rubble trains whistle with bricks. Women on the lines stack history into piles. The municipal housing office posts a sheet with his name and an address. The arithmetic of rooms is brutal. 2 families in 3 rooms. An occupation report counts beds like cattle. An Allied officer writes, "Morale is low but stable." The British begin to withdraw into policy. The Americans speak of reconstruction. The French demand security first, food later. Expellees arrive from the east in long trains that smell like sweat and resignation. They disembark with bundles and certificates from vanished administrations. 12 million, 14 million. The numbers are not fixed because the line between flight and expulsion runs through heads as much as across maps. The math is simple and unanswerable. A town flattened by bombs receives a district's worth of new mouths. The locals say refugees and mean competition. The newcomers say home and mean any place with a door. The Bundesvertriebenenamt files list names with diacritics that Germans in the Rhineland have to learn to pronounce. The arithmetic of welcome is carved by scarcity. 1 room for a family of 5 becomes 1 room for a family of 8. The city posts a notice, subtenants to be accepted. A man writes that he is a war invalid, as if this should exempt his house from the arithmetic. The housing office writes back that the arithmetic is indifferent. Close to the city, in an old barrack, displaced persons live in their own time. The DP camp functions as a small state. They organize schools and weddings. They print their own newspapers. They hold elections. The Allied intelligence summaries note with bureaucratic surprise that Jewish DPs are politically active and insistent. They are insistent because they are, for once, alive. Locals walk past the barbed wire and say they had no idea. They say it because saying it is a bridge. The DP gates are thresholds between 2 ways of living the same year. He visits because he is of both worlds. He carries letters. He hears songs in Yiddish and goes home to a dinner in German. He does not tell his new mother what the songs mean. She pretends not to see his eyes when he returns. Winter 1946-47 freezes the Ruhr. Coal trains stall. Houses burn furniture. The Wuppertal district report counts kilowatt-hours like calories. Mothers wrap children in newspaper. The British officer writes, "Turnip consumption has increased markedly. It is the coldest winter since records began. 3,000 calories are needed, 1,000 arrive." The arithmetic of heat kills gently and without malice. He joins a line at the care office when the first packages arrive. Tins from America with labels that might as well be promises. The Marshall Plan is a policy before it is a crate. Then it becomes a crate. Then it becomes a hamburger stand in a city that still smells of wet ash. The ERP shipments roll across bridges that now hold. The currency reform is a storm in paper. June 20th, 1948. Old Reichsmarks turn into Deutschemarks. 40 marks per person to start. Deposits converted at a rate that will be debated by 1,000 essays and 3 generations. The day before, shelves are bare. The day after, they are not. The narrative writes itself into memory and into the statistics. The mathematics of trust flips on a weekend. The black market withers. Cigarettes stop being coins and return to being cigarettes. The Allied occupation reports note, immediate increase in visible goods, unknown sources. He understands that algebra is not only for school. Value is a kind of faith. The city hires him to carry messages, then to file, then to stamp. He learns the corridors of a municipal building whose stone still carries heat from the fires. He memorizes names of committees, Fachbereitschaft, Wohnungsamt, Entnazifizierungsstelle. The denazification board sorts and stamps too. They sit in rooms and decide lives. Major offenders go to prison if they can be proved to have acted with zeal. Followers pay fines. Offenders without zealousness go to jobs. The paperwork is so thick it needs patience more than zeal. Allied oversight pushes hard until the Cold War makes stability the first principle. The arithmetic of guilt bows to the mathematics of soldiers on a border. A British colonel writes, "We must build with what we have." What they have are men who wore party badges and wrote memos. Some had names on warrants, some signed deportation orders. Most stamped, "You can rebuild a city with brick, you rebuild an administration with habits." The Bundesarchiv records this as continuity. The files are polite. He studies. He studies because every page takes him away from a night under a staircase. The University of Cologne opens to students who are hungry and serious. He reads Roman law. He annotates Kant in the margin. He learns the Grundgesetz like a psalm. The basic law is a promise written in careful German. It promises that no one will again be hunted by laws. Article 1 is almost a prayer. The dignity of man is inviolable. It reads like it was written in a cellar with a candle. He watches professors who talk about justice without talking about their lives between 1933 and 1945. The denazification files list them as Mitläufer, followers. One is believed to have avoided party membership. He becomes a mentor anyway because the practice of mentorship is also the practice of forgetting. There is a bargain. The mathematics of the new democracy includes variables that are not printed in textbooks. The names are old, the claims are new. School books simplify. They are written under pressure from publishers, ministries, and a populace that cannot eat the past for breakfast. The early editions are careful with words like perpetrators and generous with words like fate. The bombings are discussed with detail. The expulsions are discussed with maps. The treatment of Jews is summarized in a paragraph that mentions camps in a register that could be used to describe industrial sites. The students underline Stalingrad and bomb war. They underline hunger. They write essays on victimhood. He underlines Wannsee in his mind where no one can see. He does not tell his classmates. He wants to belong. Belonging is always mathematics. In 1951, the 131er Gesetz writes amnesty and reinstatement into law. Not an amnesty by name, but a right to pensions and reinstatements for those who lost office. The number is an article, not a miracle, but it functions like one for talent pools and budgets. Former civil servants return to desks like men returning to homes that did not move. They sit under portraits of new presidents. They write in new forms that demand not good conscience but a clear hand. A young lawyer in Bonn writes that, without them, the administration would be paralyzed. He is not wrong. He is also not the last to say it. The mathematics of public service is permanently altered. He takes his first oath with a pen that trembles for reasons that have nothing to do with the weight of the ceremony. He becomes a referenda, then an assessor. He works through stations that look like rooms in a train one must pass through. He watches colleagues who have no empty space in their biographies, and colleagues whose empty spaces glare like gaps in a jaw. He sees former SA men in clerk positions. He sees them stand for the national anthem. He hears them say, "the past," as if it were a travel destination. The files in the Landesarchiv NRW note his birth as place unknown, his religion as Moss. The clerk crosses it out and writes Ev, then crosses that out and writes none. He asks to correct it. He brings a paper from the Jewish community. The clerk looks at him as if he had asked to be an island. In the margin of his notebook he writes, "Paper is a weak synonym for truth." The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle for those who lift brick, shingle roofs, and swear at bread prices. It is a miracle for those who had business plans that could not be executed without machines. The Marshall Plan is money and grain and coal and ships and lectures about productivity. It is a training film screened in factories with captions about time motion studies. It is 11,000 locomotives, 2.3 million tons of wheat, more numbers that say life. The arithmetic of recovery has inputs and outputs. American advisors measure the distance between the workers' bench and the nuts. The pamphlets advocate coffee breaks. The Workers' Council raises wages. Erhard talks about competition and smiles like a man who has won a bet. He is round and assures. The lights come back on in shop windows. The black market moves into suit jackets and bank accounts. You can buy shoes on the high street. You can buy an opportunity with a resume. Karl Hirsch becomes a judge in 1970 because the system requires young men and women to carry the weight that older men will not admit is heavy. The forerunners are few Jewish jurists who return from exile. One is called Bauer. He will die with the window open and theories lingering. Another sits behind a desk and exudes power derived from memos and meetings. Karl is neither. He is a child of cellars and chalk. He brings to the bench a memory and a law book. He is assigned to a chamber that hears cases of theft and fraud and the occasional case with a past. The past sits in the front row wearing a tie. He reads files that smell of smoke and time. He thinks about the mathematics of guilt. In criminal law, guilt is an equation. Intent plus act equals crime. In history, guilt is a field. It has degrees. The nation tries to tessellate it into digestible shapes. The Nuremberg trials set standards. They also examined a handful. The Spruskammern process, tens of thousands. The numbers look impressive. Then the Cold War arrives, and courtrooms go quiet on certain days. In 1965, the Bundestag extends statutes of limitations for murder to keep the door open. It is a legal maneuver with an ethical core. It keeps open the possibility of speaking truth in a courtroom without shouting. He watches trials where words like Auschwitz appear beside citations of paragraphs. He watches the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials from a distance, and then, one day, from the back row, he takes notes. He hears a defendant say, "I followed orders." He hears a survivor say, "He did not have to shoot." He writes in his notebook, "The law listens. It cannot feed. It must at least listen." The DP camps are closed by then. Fürstenwald becomes a suburb. Bergen-Belson's DP camp is shut in 1950. The people inside have dispersed, some to Israel, some to America, some to small apartments in Wuppertal or Munich, where Jewish communities grow quietly like wounded plants. In Cologne, a new synagogue will be dedicated in 1959 on Runstrasse. The president attends, the bishop attends. There are speeches, there are cameras. The Bundespräsidium files the photographs under reconciliation. The local paper mentions an atmosphere of mutual understanding. A few nights later, stones are thrown. The police blotter records it with numbers. The arithmetic of hatred is never extinguished by a ceremony. It can be contained. It cannot be deleted. He is invited to a school to speak. He declines. He has learned that the classroom is a place where the past is used as a lesson about the future, which is good, but also as a means to erase the messy present, which is dishonest. He visits anyway, in secret, to listen to what is taught. The map of Germany shows 1937 borders. The teacher speaks about expulsions. The teenagers ask about bombing raids. Dresden, one says, like a wound. No one says Minsk. He writes it on the margin of his notebook. He considers raising his hand and is grateful that the code of the bench does not apply outside a courtroom. He remains quiet. He leaves before the bell. On the stairs, a boy that could have been him in 1948 carries a briefcase that could be his. The arithmetic of replacements is precise. He visits his foster parents on Sundays. The room smells like boiled potatoes and furniture polish. A photo of their son stands in a frame with a black ribbon that has been replaced 3 times. They ask about his work. He talks about theft and divorce and claims against insurance companies that did not pay. He does not talk about the moments when a witness looks into a corner and you see that he sees a past face. He does not talk about the times he breathes shallowly to keep the courtroom smell from breaking something loose in his chest. He does not tell them when a defendant speaks words he has heard in another register. He honors the bargain. The bargain is that to have a Sunday and a photograph and boiled potatoes, one must let certain names remain in their folders. The British leave. The Americans leave. French officers relocating become a paragraph in a newspaper. The Bundesarchiv labels the occupation period as closed. But in institutional memory, the occupation lingers as a way of writing and a way of avoiding. The files are brown at the edges. The stamps are different. The language is not. The functionaries say Dienstvorschrift and Zuständigkeit with a comfort that proves that the bureaucracy is a creature with its own organs. He learns to live with it. He learns to work with it. He sees where it bends. He sees that there are places where you can lean and make it move. He clerked once for a judge who had served in a tribunal that tried Allied pilots in 1944. That judge never speaks of that time. He is efficient. He is fair. He is unkind to clerks and kind to widows. He screams at a young prosecutor for laziness. He picks up a lemon drop from his desk and offers it to a child witness. He is the mathematics of ambivalence embodied. Karl writes in his notebook, "How do we live with him?" Then he writes, "We are living with him." He underlines the air. There are Allied intelligence reports that describe German reactions to unveiling of films of camps. Shock is the word. Disbelief, horror, then fatigue. The reports note a return to normal concerns. A requisitioned barracks must be returned. A road must be mended. A theatre reopens. The arithmetic of the ordinary reasserts itself with a force that no funeral can defeat. He learns to respect it. He also watches its shadow, the tendency to let the ordinary be an alibi. If the math of daily life allows forgetting, the law must be the place where memory remains a function. In his court, he watches a case about property. A German family claims a house lost in the bombing. A distant cousin claims the furniture of a Jewish family that never returned. The inventory lists a candlestick, a prayer book, a cradle. The law demands proof. The witness brings a memory. The court must weigh them. He wonders at the arithmetic of proof for things burned in a fire of policy. He is bound to write a verdict with the words insufficient when he wants to write unforgettable. He writes the only thing the law allows. He writes it with a hand that shakes. The Cold War sets the architecture of his career. West Germany joins NATO. Conscription returns with new uniforms and a new doctrine. The Bundesverfassungsgericht rules on the limits of power, with sentences that read like mathematics, that learned empathy. The Spiegel affair teaches a generation that the state is not a person. Students march in 1968 for things that start in Saigon and end at a lecture hall. He watches a police line form and dissolve. He hears the slogan, "Under the gowns," the musty smell of 1,000 years, and then hears the clean-up crew sweep away the broken glass. The bench sits above the flow. He is older than the students and younger than the men who run the ministries. He speaks when the code dictates. He writes when it helps. The arithmetic of rooms improves. Apartments go up. The expellés are no longer called that in colophons. They are neighbors. Their children become colleagues. The associations keep records and hold conventions. They mourn at monuments shaped like houses and crosses combined. The public ceremonies are careful with pronouns. We suffered. We mourn. We remember. The Bundesarchiv flyers for memorial events use neutral language. The words perpetrator and Jew attached to specific calendars. He attends both kinds and still leaves before the last hymn. Occupation Report, British Zone, March 1946. A brittle page in a reader notes, anti-Semitism persists at lower levels, often disguised as resentment against alleged privileges for Jewish DPs. He hears this disguised resentment in a butcher shop in 1950. He hears it in a council meeting in 1954. He hears it in a council meeting in 1954. It is the same resentment that becomes a joke in a bar and a rumor in a line and a missing fuse in a synagogue. He collects these as a man collects foreign coins. He does not exchange them. He keeps them to know where he lives. His name appears in the Cologne city directory. It appears on conference programs and invitations that smell of freshly mimeographed ink. It appears on a list in a police file because the police are instructed to keep track of judges. It appears in a letter from an old classmate now in Frankfurt who writes to say simply, "Thanks." The letter mentions the Auschwitz trials. It mentions a father's silence and a mother's tears. It mentions a seminar where a professor said, "Context." He writes back and quotes Article 1. He writes, "We live by the first sentence." He writes, "We live by the files." He marries a woman whose father returned from war with a leg made of metal and a tendency to polish it with care. Her mother keeps a box of jewelry inherited from a cousin. Her mother can no longer name without tightening her mouth. They have a son. They have a daughter. The house has books in German and English and one thin volume in Yiddish that no one reads. He puts it back on the shelf every time it falls. He takes it down once a year. He does not open it. He wants it to be there like a fact he will not exploit. The court calendar is relentless. Breaches of the peace, embezzlements, assaults. One case that involves a guard from a camp that was not in any textbook in 1952 and is in every archive by 1970. The guard sits and looks at the floor. The public benches are full. He watches the faces in the back row more than he watches the defendant. He hears a woman who is older than his mother and younger than his grandmother say, "Finally." He writes a sentence that uses the word murder, not because he wants to, but because the evidence is sufficient. That is what the law demands. The law does not demand memory. He supplies that himself in the margins of his file. He writes in his notebook at lunch in pencil that smudges against the pocket of his suit. He writes about numbers. He writes about rooms. He writes arithmetic of scarcity and arithmetic of forgetting. He writes mathematics of law. He writes mathematics of law. He knows that patriarchal fathers in coats and ties speak of Rechtsstaat with pride. He joins them because the alternative is the return of the knock. He refuses to forget because the alternative is also a return. He sits between alternatives and calls it a career. The Bundesarchive will list his tenure as 1970-1998. No one will put a footnote that says attic or cellar. He will. In a notebook no clerk will ever see. He keeps in a drawer a letter from 1946 written on thin paper with a blue stamp from UNRRA that says, in a hand that is nearly gone, Dear Kalman. The letter is in Polish. He does not speak Polish. He holds the paper like a bridge and accepts that he is not supposed to cross it. He has practiced not crossing. He has made it a virtue. He knows it is also a wound. In a cabinet in his office there are files that smell like dust and copied ink. There are names. There are crimes. There are acquittals. There are convictions. In a folder labeled Correspondence Citizens, there are letters that say, Thank you. There are letters that say, Shame. The mathematics of the public is a bar graph that never holds still. He attends a memorial in 1970 for the 25th anniversary of the end of the war. There is a wreath. There is a choir. There are speeches that say, Never again, and Our dead. He stops listening because he knows the syllables and the rhythm, and he knows that the grammar will not change because no one person can write new grammar for a nation. He looks at the faces of people who cannot be placed into categories without doing violence to what they are. That is the law's job, to categorize without violence. He knows how rarely that is possible. He goes home. He takes out the docket card and writes what he could not say in the chapel, then or now. He writes it without drafting. 1970, Cologne. I spent my childhood in attics and cellars. Now I sit above a courtroom. The law that once hunted us now wears my face. The sentence is dangerous because a law that hunted can hunt again if sentences like this are spoken on a stage with microphones and a crowd and a longing for simplification. The sentence is honest because he knows where the uniforms went. Some went into closets, some went into museums, some were burned in stoves. The habits did not burn. He writes the sentence and then writes the mathematics that underpins it. The mathematics of rooms. 2 families to a room, then 1 family to a room, then no one remembers. The mathematics of hunger. 900 calories becomes 1,500 becomes 3,000. The body remembers differently than the mind. The mathematics of guilt. 5 categories on paper. A spectrum in life. 10,000 lesser offenders. A handful of major. The arithmetic of office. Dismissed in 1945, reinstated in 1951, retired with a pension in 1979. Numbers do not. They also do not tell the truth alone. He adds the mathematics of encounter. DP camps near German towns become supermarkets near subdivisions. The wire comes down, but the difference remains in anecdotes. He remembers a day in 1947 when a German woman stood outside the fence and cried. No one touched her because it was not clear whether touching would heal or injure. He remembers a day in 1969 when an old man recognized a name in a newspaper and wrote a letter to an editor that was half confession, half excuse. He remembers a day in 1955 when a clerk looked at him and said, "Jew?" like a question. He remembers a day in 1963 when a prosecutor said, "Finally," and dropped his papers. He remembers a day in 1967 when his son asked what a number on an arm meant, and he said, "Everything." He writes, in 1970, about his colleagues. He writes, "Good men with gaps." He writes men with answers that sound like decrees. He writes a woman who asks better questions than all of us. He writes a clerk who fills out forms like a prayer. He writes a janitor who remembers when he was a guard. He writes a policeman who apologizes without words. He writes a defendant who tells the truth because he is tired. He writes a witness who lies because the truth will not go back in the bottle. He writes a nation that wants to be good. He writes a nation that wants to be right. He writes a nation that wants to be right. He writes a judge who does not know the files will survive him. The Bundesarchiv will number and box and send researchers down to breathe the air of paper and time. Someone will crack a spine and read Hirsch, Karl, Decision in State vs. 1970. The names will be redacted in certain editions. The crimes will be described. The language will be the language of the court, neutral, precise, sometimes with a chill. The researcher will close the file and step into a world where law is a story told in numbers and pronouns. He will be content with that. He will also go home to his notebook. He imagines a map of the city in 1945, overlaid with a map of 1970. The corners line up, the cracks do not. He walks from the cathedral to the courthouse and counts his steps. He measured distances in numbers before he measured them in meaning. The courthouse is made of stone that did not burn. The parking lot is newer than he is. The bench is older than he will be. He sits. He looks at a defendant. He looks at a witness. He looks at a piece of paper. He hears the echo of boots on a stair that no longer exists. He hears the clerk call the case. He hears his own voice say, "Please be seated." He keeps a photograph on his desk behind a folder, carefully hidden, so that only when he moves a file does it appear. It shows two women on a pile of bricks, a cathedral behind them, a hole where a street was. The caption in the Bundesarchiv says nothing about their names. He does not need their names to know that without them there would be no bench for him to sit on. He thanks them with a pen. He writes the names for the unnamed. Trümmerfrauen. He writes the word again in the margin. He writes it like a shrine. He writes it because the shrine is needed to hold up a sentence. The sentence is the first sentence. He reads it when he is alone. He reads it aloud to no one. The country that made him a judge is also the country that made it necessary to hide under a staircase. It is the same place with different numbers on the files. It is the same place with a different coat of paint. The law wears his face now. He sneaks looks in mirrors and decides he can live with it. He decides that the duties are heavy and worth the bones they bend. He decides that he will write down what he cannot say because it is sometimes kinder to write than to speak. He decides that in the arithmetic of his life, two numbers sum to a whole, child and judge. He decides that the ledger can bear the weight. He puts the docket card back into his drawer. He locks it. He goes back out to the hall and nods to a bailiff who once wore another uniform. He enters the courtroom. The benches creak. Someone coughs. He says, "The court is in session," and the present covers the past like paint over old handwriting. The paint will flake someday. The handwriting will show again. It always does. He knows this. He knows this. He knows this. He chooses to live in the space between the layers. He knows another arithmetic waits. Retirement. Memory. The end. He does not draw those numbers yet. He has a case this afternoon. He has his pen. He has his face in a mirror. He has a line he cannot say. He has a drawer where it is written. He has his life like a ledger with pages numbered and pages missing. He has a city that turned rubble into streets. He has a county that turned mottos into statutes. He has a book that begins with dignity. He has a boyhood that began with a knock. He has an understanding that the front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, and not across a battlefield.